Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Before the break, Kate mentioned the Journal's editorial today, and the headline is Wake Up Washington, a second regional war, first Ukraine and now Israel calls for an urgent bipartisan defense effort. And Bill, I wonder from your perspective, what would that kind of effort look like if indeed Washington decides that this is the moment to wake up from some of the partisan bickering that we've seen, particularly in the House in recent days?
Well, I hope it does. As I mentioned, I consider this not a regional conflict alone, but an assault on the U.S. I mean, clearly Hamas and Iran knew that American citizens would be killed if they have hostages, as President Biden and Jake Sullivan sort of admit they do. That's another issue. Are they going to publicly threaten them the way they've threatened Israel over our hostages? That's an act of war, too. So I think the country does have to be united. I mean, a lot of the issue will come up in the funding. Israel and Ukraine are different. They need different things, not the same thing. But I think we have to fund our friends and try to defeat our enemies. The idea that we could let this stand is really monstrous. And people compare it to 9/11. Certainly for the Israelis, that's an apt comparison. You know, I remember in the Bush White House, you know, people are all for a bipartisan policy to defeat terrorism until you actually took a step to do so. The surge was probably the most unpopular speech I wrote, and the one that had the most effect in that pretty quickly after the surge, we saw that what Bush did led to a defeat there. And I think Joe Biden has to do that. I don't know if he has it. Again, he says the right things, but I don't know if he has it. For one thing, if he wants Republican help for a bipartisan policy, which I think he should ask for, he has to stop calling them extremists and white supremacists and Nazis. He's been very divisive as a president, and he has to really rise above it. I'm just not sure Joe Biden is up to it.
But for the moment, at least, the House is paralyzed and leaderless without a speaker. The House of Representatives is not really supposed to conduct regular business. There was a Republican meeting Monday night between Republicans in the House, and reports coming out of that is that there is no consensus. There are some members of Kevin McCarthy's faction who say they intend to nominate and vote for him when they gather on Wednesday to pick a new speaker, and neither of the two candidates that are declared, Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise, seem to have the majority that they would need. And in this absence, in this vacuum, deposed Speaker Kevin McCarthy on Monday had a press briefing at the Capitol. One of the news reports says he was trying to project normalcy and leadership in the face of the invasion of Israel. Here's a piece of what he said.
Right now in Israel, we store ammunition. We should be able to release that. Another thing that needs to happen here, as we had supplied arms to Ukraine, we have depleted our stockpile. We are slow in redeveloping our stockpile. This is something I have asked this administration time and again. I believe it could be a bipartisan, that we should expand our ability of production so we are never caught short. And we watch this terror. And the one thing you have to realize, this new evil axis of power work together.
Today at 5 p.m., House Republicans are supposed to be meeting for a candidate forum to hear from Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan. But whoever gets the job, it seems like they may have some difficulty in bridging this divide in the Republican caucus, even on this question of military aid to Israel. Here's a quote from House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Michael McCall. There's a discussion about putting Israeli funding with Ukraine funding, maybe Taiwan funding, and finally border security. To me, that would be a pretty good package. And other members of the House caucus that are going a different direction. Here is Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida. Why would the White House even go down this road of tying Ukraine and Israel? Obviously, Ukraine is an issue in our conference. Let's make sure we can take care of Israel and give them what they need. We'll take care of everything else later. Kate, what's your view on how this debate within the Republican House is likely to play out?
Sure, Kyle. I kind of want to rebuke all sides here, and I'd start here with the Biden administration on defense spending. We need to look at the larger context, which is that President Biden has proposed a real cut to defense after inflation for 3 years in a row, and he's done it even as the world has gotten more dangerous. He's put defense on a diet, even as he has put double-digit increases into domestic agencies. And when you look at historical defense spending as a share of our economy, it goes in waves, but you've got 8.6% in Vietnam, about 6% during the Cold War, even 4.5% recently in the 2010s for Iraq and Afghanistan. We're currently at 3%, and the ship has not turned, even though we now have 2 regional wars by foreign powers who are increasingly aligned, Iran and Russia. So we need to get serious about that if we want to defend ourselves. That's just a reality of it. For the House Republicans have really allowed themselves to indulge in these fictions like we can just focus on China, even though China is playing in the entire world. We don't have to worry about Ukraine. It can be Europe's problems. I think the weekend's events have really shown in real time just how completely untenable that is, and that the U.S. really does have global responsibilities, and we aren't able to just check out from Ukraine or the Middle East to focus on China. So I do think there is a logic to combining funding for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, especially as we discuss that axis of evil connection that we've been talking about. And I think that the politics are evolving somewhat as the facts change. I think it will be harder for some of these members who have been just so completely opposed to additional aid for Ukraine, even though a lot of that has been helpful in expanding our own weapons production, like 155 millimeter artillery, which Israel may end up needing. But it's going to be harder, I think, for some of those critics to oppose aid to Israel, the U.S. strategic ally in the Middle East, and also Taiwan, which many of them have been saying rightly that is a real problem that could percolate in the next few years. So I think it makes sense. I think you need leadership from the president, which has so far been absent in focusing on our own national defense. And I think you need Republicans who have typically, when voters have been worried about national security, they trust Republicans to handle that. You need them to come back and also show some leadership on the issue as well.
Finally, Bill, what do you make of what the Republican presidential candidates vying for the 2024 nomination are saying about this? And do you suppose that this new conflict will increase the salience of foreign policy in those presidential debates, not typically an issue that Iowans or New Hampshireites every 4 years is at the top of their list, but maybe this year they will be thinking about it more than in most years?
Absolutely, especially if there's a specter of hostages in Gaza being threatened by Hamas. So I think it will change. The Republicans, I think, have been muddled. They're afraid of things that they now see. I think there's a faction that sees this as Israel versus Ukraine. Who should we give aid to? The real line of attack is it should be American strength versus the Green New Deal. We're spending all this money on this crazy effort to transform the economy, and that is impacting our defense funding. And they should be hammering the president on this. They should support him, like on a speech today, that he's standing up for Israel. But they should say, we have a better way. And frankly, part of the reason we are where we are is democratic policy toward Iran, starting with Obama and continuing with Biden.
Thank you, Bill and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.